In this video, we're going to talk about logic operations, and we'll review some of those operations that we've talked about in the past. But then we're also going to talk about operator precedence and what happens when we have more than one logic operation in a statement. So let's start out. Get the last name, the department ID, and salary. From the employees table. Where the department ID greater than 50 and salary is greater than 12,000. Department ID fix all my typos. First, let's run the select without the where clause. We can see these are all the people. Department IDs greater than 50 would basically be all those right here. Also the 80 here, and there's a 110 down there. Salaries greater than 12,000. We see quite a few of those in here. Let's try this and see what the difference is. Now we only have 3 people. Now we saw more salaries greater than 12,000, and we saw more departments than this that were greater than 50. But remember, both conditions, when we use an and as a conjunction, it means the thing on the left has to be true and the thing on the right has to be true. If not, we're limiting that row out. So if both those things are not true, the row gets eliminated, and that leaves only those that have department IDs greater than 50 and salaries greater than 12,000. Let's change that slightly to hire date and job ID. And our where clause this time, we will look to see who has a hire date. It comes after. Remember, greater than means after when we're talking dates. Use 01 January 1st. $1998. And whose job ID like, and in here we'll put %SA. So what does this one do? Both these conditions have to be true. We have one comparison here that's comparing the hire date column to look to see if it comes after the 1st of January 1998, and the job ID to see if it's like this. And remember, basically we're looking for anything that has a capital SA in it. Did that backwards on how I want to do it. I want it to start with a capital SA. I believe the naming structure we're using in here would just give us salespeople. All right, so we see the slot key, Taylor and Grant, sales manager and sales reps. So both those conditions are true for all of those. Notice that I used the hire date in my selection, but I didn't have to use the hire date in my select statement. So I used it in my where clause without including it in the select clause. There's no problems when we want to do that. Let's do some different things out this time. Let's get manager ID, and we'll get location ID. And from the employees table, why isn't location ID? I have a bad query in my notes here. I do. I misread my notes. Let's try that again. Select. Let's get the department name. We're going to go to a different table. Manager ID. Location ID. From departments table. Let's pull those up first to make sure this part of the query works. Valid. I got to spell department right. There we go. There's all of them. Now let's do some limiting. In our where clause, we're going to do where location ID is 2500, or where the manager ID was 124. So what are we doing here? Location ID equals 2500. Right now I see that's the sales department, right? So we're looking for anybody that works at the sales department location. Manager ID equals 124 is here, shipping value. So we're looking for either of those conditions to be true. This one or this one. Or they could both be true. And here we see those two columns, those two rows that I pointed out. This one got pulled out because the manager ID was equal to 124, and this one got pulled out because the location ID was equal to 2500. So, or either condition could be true to get the row to be included in our query results. Next, we're going to talk about not. So, and, or, and not are the big logical operations we're talking about today for right now. Let's get the department name, the location ID. Oh, we'll just keep this. Let's do where the location ID, do not. So we have and, or, and not. We're going to look for things that are not in a list. I don't want to see locations 1700. And I don't want to see location 1800. Okay. So if the location is in either of those locations, they will not be included. If we used in, it would only get those locations. If we use not in, it reverses the logic. Not always reverses the logic. Shows us the ones that are not in those two locations. All right, we're going to go to one that's a little bit harder, and I'm going to copy and paste it. So I can talk about it instead of just spending a lot of time watching me type. So what are we getting here? We're looking at the employees table. We're asking for the last name, first name, and department ID. Now let's look at our condition down here, because we have two conjunctions. We have an and an or. So we're looking for somebody whose department ID is in 50 or 80. And somebody whose first name starts with capital C. Remember, case doesn't matter in Microsoft T-SQL. Okay. Or their last name has an S in it. Now the question is it first names that start with C or last names with an S who are also in department 50 or 80? Or does it do the and condition first and then use those with possibilities for the or? So let's run this. All right, see if we can figure out, well, this person didn't get out because they were in department 50 or 80. Does have an S in the last name, but first name does not start with C. And you can go on through these. But what are the rules here? What are the rules? What happens first, the and or the or? I'm going to put them up here because we talk a lot about, a lot of people say, oh, PEMDAS, it's easy. And it is. For our traditional math, we follow this order. But now that we're on programming languages, we have more things than just plain old math. Not parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. We also have these logical operations. Well, what comes first? Okay, well, the highest priority is doing arithmetic, okay, using the rules of arithmetic, then concatenation, then we do comparisons, then we do the null values, the like values, and the in values. And those are all equal in level, so we go from left to right on those. Then we do the betweens or the not betweens. Then nots happen, followed by ands, and then ors. So and has a higher precedence than or. And look, they're both down there pretty low. Almost everything else happens before we try to combine the conditions, right? We evaluate whatever expression we have here and whatever expression we have here before we do the and. This gets evaluated, this gets evaluated, and this gets evaluated. Then what happens first? We do the and first. So in this one, it's in the correct order. We do department ID in 50 and 80 and first name. And those are the rows that get picked out. They have to meet both conditions. In addition to those, anybody who has an S in their last name, because that is ORed with the results of the and. So the and happens first. Okay. And we can change this with parentheses. Let's do, well, first let's start out, let's do this. I'm going to put the or first and then put the and. Now they're in a different order. And when we execute this, now we're getting people who are, so the and happens first. So people who have an S in their last name, which is all these people, and a first name that starts with C. So the only person that got pulled out of this was, I believe, Curtis Davies. He's the only person that met both of those conditions. And remember, that happened first. But then we ordered it with anybody who's in department 50 or 80. So the rest of these people got pulled out because they're in department 50 or they're in department 80. Right? So the and happened first. Now let's do this, and we can force the or to happen before the and. So the parentheses can say, or these two things together, department 50 and 80, or first name starting with C, and then and it with a last name like S, and you'll see the results will be different. And we've narrowed our list down. So these people are all in department 50 or 80, or they have a first name that starts with C. In this case, Curtis Davies has both. And they also have to have a last name with an S in it. So it narrowed our list down. So you need to be really careful about the order you stick things in conjunction with the results that you want. So many times I see students just, hey, I got a result. So this is the result we wanted, but they'll type this and run it and say, look, I got results, so it must be correct. But is it really what you were trying to get? You need to think carefully about the order you put your conjunctions and whether or not you need parentheses. And it is okay to sometimes use a set of parentheses that you don't need. And always goes first, right? But if I want people who satisfy this condition, I can put parentheses around it, even though we know and would come first, but it helps us read it better and know and be sure that comes out correctly. It just makes more clarity. So it doesn't hurt to do that. Even though the and would automatically come first, we can put the parentheses to make it clear to anybody who might be looking at the. Nothing wrong with that. All right, so be careful using those conjunctions. In the order your problems today will have some where you have to write some where conditions with conjunctions and make sure you get the correct answers. Also, be sure that you're being specific on the answers to the questions. Don't use asterisks. Don't use select star. If the question asks for the name of the person, then you get the last name and first name, or at least the last name, or whatever it's asking. But don't be lazy and just use a star in your select statements. We want specific answers to the specific questions. So the answer to who is a name. If I asked you who had their hand up, you would give me a name. You wouldn't just give me a list of the class, right? So, or you wouldn't give me birth dates for the people in the class or anything like that. So be specific on your select statements. Pick out the columns that answer the question that I'm asking when you write your query.